All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to get started. Hi. Please find your seats. All right, welcome back. Up next, we have a real treat for you all today. We have a fireside chat. First, let me introduce Professor Ashli Carter here with the funky glasses. I'm a fan. Very exciting there. She's a lecturer in the management division here at Columbia Business School, as well as Wall Street legend Sallie Krawcheck, graduate of the class of 1992, as well as CEO and founder of Ellevest. Let's get going. I'll hand it over to you.
Amazing. I'm so excited to be here and to have met you. I know there's a lot of excitement in the room, so I'm just going to jump in. We're at a really interesting moment in business and technology. There's all these innovations. We've been talking about it all day, disruption. And there's also inequalities still happening.
Yes, there are.
And we've been talking about a little bit before the political landscape is quite challenging in some ways. And when I talk to students, I hear excitement because there's opportunities, and I also hear a lot of overwhelm. As you scan the landscape right now, how would you characterize it, and for women in particular, and do you find yourself hopeful?
I am hopeful. I am hopeful in the face of not nearly enough progress. That, you know, we can still, when I look at my industry, the financial services industry, you still know who the women CEOs are. You can name them because there aren't that many, whereas when you start to name the male CEOs, you just run out of names pretty quickly. But the reason I'm hopeful is because I do think your generation is taking a different approach than mine did, which is really important. My generation, we looked at the top. We saw there was one seat at the table for a woman, and we just knew that we were competing against other women. And so you hear about by the way, I was pretty clueless. I had a real moment 2 weeks ago when I discovered that a woman who is a little bit ahead of me, probably 10 years ahead of me, who I have always thought the world of. And if you said, what do you think? I'd be, oh, she's the best. She's the best. And you know, I've known her for, I used to be an analyst covering a company she worked at. We've gotten together for cocktails, for whatever. And someone said to me, yeah, well, when it was your last funding round, and we were going to bring the funding to her on the board she sat on, she said she wouldn't fund it because she didn't care, she didn't like you. And it just floored me. And I was actually saying to my husband, I sort of knew I was up against the patriarchy and internalized sexism, but I didn't know I was up against other women, really. And you just were. Y'all have got to change that. The good news I see is that women in tech, women in venture, women startup CEOs are completely flying in the face of that and are coming together, funding each other, supporting each other, talking each other up. And I think recognizing that whereas in traditional financial services, we probably were competitors, it is, if you're funding a business as a woman, because it's all pattern recognition, you are much better off if other women are getting funded. You do not want to be the only one. And so doing what people are like, oh, I don't want to lower the bar. We all know if you're supporting a woman, you're not lowering the bar, you're raising the bar. And doing what the men have been doing, we've been playing the game as an individual sport. They've been playing the game as a team sport. They've funded each other, talked each other up, hired each other's kids, put each other on the boards, you name it, they marched together and it benefited them. And that, I think, is the difference that your generation not only needs to make, but in fact is making. And that's, I'm not of the view, look, I love men and I've been married to a couple of them. I think they're just like super amazing creatures. Really, they've done great. But if we honestly think that just the one additional piece of research that says that diversity is an advantage is going to, turn on the light bulb for them, you're sorely mistaken. the way we're going to progress has got to come from those of us in this room working together.
Wow. Well, you're a boundary spanner. We've seen kind of your history in large financial institutions at the highest levels, but also moving into the tech space as an entrepreneur, as a founder. And when I think about your career from my vantage point, it seems like at these different junctions, you had a lot of different possible paths, and they may have been viable for different reasons. So I'm curious to hear, what was a bit of your decision-making to found Ellevest, and what lessons might you share for women in the room, women who are watching, who have a lot of potential paths, and it's not between right and wrong, it's really a decision between right and right,
for sure. I loved working at the big, ugly, hairy, banks. I love complexity. I love bringing, sort of simplicity and vision to complexity. Make no mistake, they put me on that glass cliff. I was brought in to turn around the research business in Smith Barney at Citigroup after the research scandal had sort of floored the business and the company. And I was running Sanford Bernstein at the time. I had been on the cover of Fortune as the last honest analyst. I was running the only independent research operation of any size, and Sandy Weil, and what was an astounding move, said, would you come from running 320 people to 35,000? Got there, turned it around. Then the subprime crisis hits. Sandy's gone, Chuck Prince is gone, in comes a new CEO, and he and I do not see eye to eye. We had missold products to clients by accident. I wanted to reimburse them. He did not. It went to the board. The board sided with me, and then he fired me. Which, and by the way, I've had board members, I've seen them in the years since, and they've apologized. And I'm like, yeah, but could I have my friggin' job? And very importantly, my money back? And they're like, no, but way to go. Very brave of you. So then I do that, right? We got that friggin' thing turned around, and then Bank of America buys Merrill Lynch, and the FA attrition rate is 50%. There's a big culture clash. They bring me in to turn that around. We get the attrition rate from 50% to 5%. You can't get it below 5% because they count death in the attrition rate, and those FAs are sort of old. And I'm a very talented woman, but I cannot keep a man alive. And 2 years into that, I get called into the CEO's office, the new CEO, because it was a new one who hired me, and he's like, thanks for the turnaround. Now we're going to give it to a 63-year-old white man who's never run a wealth management business in his life, and somehow think he can do a better job. And I remember like, I'm sorry, you're firing me? And I'd like that money back too. But so after a couple of those, I had another opportunity to turn something around, and I'm like, wait, I get the game. Like, you bring me in, put me on the glass cliff, and when it's back to normal, it goes back to normal. I'm not signing up for that again. And so I took the easy way out and started my own company, which, by the way, makes Wall Street look easy, starting your own company. Make no mistake. But what I did, and I tried through my career for, I had a decade as a researcher, I had a decade of misery. My 20s, I was an investment banker, I hated it. I had a decade of being a research analyst, running research, loved it. I had a decade of being sort of a financial services turnaround person, and now in my 50s as an entrepreneur. And what I really tried to do when I was thinking about that next step is, this is the experience I've amassed, which, not just very few women, very few people have. Do I see a problem that this experience can help solve? And the problem I identified is a really important one, which is women don't have as much money as men do. That's a really important problem, because think about all of the marriages that women are stuck in because they don't have the money to leave. By the way, there's no domestic abuse without financial abuse. Think of all the terrible jobs women are in that they don't have the courage or the money to leave. Think about all the businesses that haven't started, right? We love to say at Ellevest, nothing bad happens when women have more money. And so I said, that's a problem worth solving. Well, my old industry figured it knew what the deal was, which is, well, it's women are risk averse. Like, that's why they don't invest as much. That's why they don't have as much. They have a confidence gap, right? You've heard that. By the way, we have Ellevest research out today about the great wealth transfer. We went into the research of what happens when women have more money. It's not that women don't have money because they don't have confidence. They don't have confidence because they don't have money, right? And you give a woman some money, her confidence, by the way, you give her a financial windfall and inheritance, her confidence doubles so that she's even more confident than men. And so looked at this and said, maybe it's not her fault. Maybe, I don't know, just spitballing, in an industry in which 98% of mutual fund dollars are managed by men, even though women are better at it, in which 85% of financial advisors are men, overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly old, you know, maybe women look at this and say, not for me. And what if we, and by the way, and I got caught, as some of you are like, isn't for women inferior and junior varsity? Oh, we're so cute and fun. That's called internalized misogyny, okay? Right? And instead of having internalized misogyny, what if we actually build the investing platform that centers women? And does things like, again, just spitballing, has an investing algorithm that recognizes gender, which sort of matters if you're a woman because you earn less and live longer, right? If you don't recognize that, you risk running out of money. That actually has advisors who reflect ourselves back to us, who, you know, has impact investing without giving up financial returns, right, which women are looking for. And so I don't even know what the question was. But that's what I decided to do.
I think you answered it beautifully.
But then, by the way, raising money's hellish, so we should talk about that too. That's horrible. It's horrible.
I mean, one thing that strikes me about what you're saying is you can't predict the future. Like, you don't know where your career may take you. And I think for current students, that can be a bit daunting.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're trying to prepare for a very long and impactful career. So in terms of concrete things that they can be investing in their future, building their skills, building their networks, you know, what should they be doing knowing that things can change?
Okay, so I'm a little biased here, but I do love to say that the best career advice that nobody else will give you is to invest your money. And that men invest more than we women do at all socioeconomic levels. And for the women in this room, it costs you millions of dollars over the course of your lives. For other women, it'll cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Somehow, you know, my friend Reshma Sojani has said boys are taught to be brave, girls are taught to be perfect. And so we do find a blocker is, whoa, I don't exactly know what a straddle swap option strategy is yet, so let me figure that out before I start to invest. And men just move on and invest. The reason investing is so important is because there have only been two ways to scalably, sustainably build wealth in this country. One has been real estate, which is not bad, right? I mean, there's that whole redlining thing, which is, you know, bad. You know, and the real estate goes up 3% a year. It takes a lot of debt. It, you know, it's a money pit. You know, it can be illiquid. Yeah, but 3% a year is not bad because it compounds. I mean, you're all business school students. Like, compounding is a beautiful thing. Investing, whew, now that's sexy, right? Because that goes up, you know, equity market's about 10% a year. It doesn't take a big investment, doesn't take a big mortgage. You can sell it any day, you know, on the stock exchange. That has been the sustainable way to build wealth. And with an Ellevest, it takes like, you can't make it take 15 minutes to sign up. Like, you have to be super slow typist, like carrier pigeon type of situation. And I always say that maybe the best, most highest return, most impactful 15 minutes of your life is meeting your partner in a bar someplace, but we're number 2. And for many people, number 1. So my advice always is you got to take care of yourself, and that is, in fact, through investing, and get all your friends to too, because that is, you know, meaningful and impactful and wealth building. You know, in terms of, well, how do I manage my career? look, I think it's staying open and staying curious and learning. I'm so shocked. I'm in my 50s, which feels younger than it used to. But I'm stunned by the number of my generation and friends who just stopped learning. Just hang out with people like them and do the whole, those young people, and, I'm not going to check out what's going on, Instagram, that's for kids, or, whatever the thing is. And finding if you're spending time with people who are different generations, different backgrounds than you, always voraciously learning, then you'll always be coming up to all kinds of opportunities. And just recognize, look, I got fired on the front page of the Wall Street Journal 2 times. That is for women, that is a world record. That is a world record. And even on the day that they kicked me out of Bank of America, when I'm like, this is like one of the worst days of my life, but it's actually the best day. Because you know what, if they didn't want me, I don't want to be there. And I can find 100 other ways to be successful. I may not just be looking for them, but if I open my eyes and sort of look around, then they will fly by. Yeah. Play in traffic. That is the one issue with working from home, right? Which I love for the flexibility it gives women, but you have to actually force yourself to be out there too and play in traffic so people don't forget you.
Yeah, you mentioned different generations. Mm-hmm. Today, we have a bonus day of Black History Month because we're in a leap year. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when I think about our relationship to money, there's a lot of shared history that women have with this and cultural messages and things like this. But there's also specific histories too in different communities, Black communities, different generations, right, shape our relationships to money, the associations that we have with them. How do you think about kind of this mission of getting more money to women? Yeah. And educating women how to make these investments when we might have different starting points.
Yeah. First of all, sort of picking up on the before you ask the question, Gloria Steinem has said that the big miss of 70s feminism, which is my mom's feminism, was that it did not at all focus on building wealth. And men have been building wealth, at a greater rate relative to women every day since then. And in fact, it's even worse than that, because the trick the patriarchy played on us is that it is cute and fun and flirty to be bad with money, right? It's just, just adorable. And I think of it when, for my generation, sports was the equivalent. That when I was in middle school and the choice was volleyball or cheerleader, there was only one choice, and it was cheerleader. That cute little skirt. And if you played volleyball, you'd be viewed as mannish and unattractive, and those girls were sort of bigger and and then here come Billie Jean King and the Williams sisters and Megan Rapinoe and Mia Hamm, and they made being athletic part of a well-lived life. And we need to do the same thing with money and recognize that it is part of a well-lived life, not that we're greedy shrews, if we're seen to be wanting money. And then again, this is where the media does a job on us. Something like 2/3 of articles or videos to men around money are positive, affirmative, grow money. But for women, 75% are, don't buy the latte. Don't, Carrie Bradshaw bought so many shoes she couldn't afford her apartment, and financial planning doesn't have to be really, really hard. And so we get all these patronizing negative messages around money, and again, we internalize them. And so even in y'all's generation, men are much more likely to take the lead in money and investing than women are. What was the question?
Taking an intersectional lens on getting women money.
Look, I think we've just got to start where we are with it, and recognize that for some that's, getting the credit card debt paid off, and for others that's, getting the match of the 401k. That there are, sort of basic rules, you want to, for your take-home pay, 50-30-20 rule, 50% needs, 30% fun, 20% wants. Right, but have that flex depending on where you are, and no shame to where you start. there haven't been the opportunities for anybody but white people to build wealth and to build generational wealth. But how do we get that started today?
Yes. I'm curious about storytelling and how it's featured in your career. I know you have a journalism degree. And as you think about sort of these different paths that you've taken, so much, I think, of being able to navigate that is being able to communicate who you are, what you care about, what you do. So how has storytelling featured in your career and provided you space to have impact?
Yeah, it is so important, and particularly if you can, I always put it differently. I always say if you can have the analytics and the words, you are so far ahead of anybody else. And so many of your business school classmates have got the analytics, but cannot express it. And to be able to, I learned as a research analyst, which is such a great beginning career move, to take those analytics and how do you then tell that story? And how do you brand that story? So, for example, just today, we've launched this Ellevest work on the great wealth transfer that, by the way, is going to do the work that Lean In did not through our longevity. Because the boomers are starting to die. That money immediately goes to women. 80% of women die single and then go to our sons and daughters. And the power of this is so great, it's going to put tens of trillions of dollars in women's pockets. And we're going to have the majority of wealth in this country. So things are starting to move and change. But how do you tell that story? What does that look like on the other side? And we were, even to this morning as we're launching the work, we're like, we should call it the feminization of wealth, right? Let's label it that. Let's call it that. Let's pour meaning into that. But, and if we can get that to work for us, then we'll say feminization of wealth and everybody will know that's the, the sort of beautiful environment on the other side. Why is it beautiful? Because when women have more money, they donate more money. When women have more money, they donate money to politicians who don't strip away our reproductive rights. When women have more money, our families are better. Like, there's a great place on the other side. Let's brand it. Let's call it the feminization of wealth. So I'm always thinking, how do you take the numbers and turn them into pithy words? And by the way, the other important thing here, talk about things that others aren't. Nobody cares if you are the 1,000th person to see the great wealth transfer. They care if you're one of the first. And if you can, you don't have to be the very first, but if you can be one of the first and wrap it in a story, that's important. It's also important for us for our own personal careers. We've all got a personal brand. Don't love the name there, but a personal brand. The personal brand is what people say about you when you leave the room, right? It's really important. You may be like, I don't have a personal brand. That seems silly. No, you've got a personal brand. You can either shape it or you can't, right? And a personal brand is not, I'm good at everything. So for years, my personal brand is I'm the gal who turns around the Wall Street businesses that the guys can't. That's my personal brand. But it's a good brand, right? Because it tells you exactly what it is and what it's not. And now it's all about Ellevest and getting more money in the hands of women. But what are those unique things about you? And then find ways to say them. I don't want to brag. You can do with a little bragging. But, you can always talk about how you and your team and this is what there are ways you can sort of bring it. But I think you in this world, if you're not very conscious about it, you're really losing out.
Before we open up to questions, speaking of brand and what people say when you leave the room, you have earned a reputation for your integrity and sticking to your values, even when it's not popular.
Yep.
And I talk a lot with students about this, particularly in the negotiations class, which is, can you afford to tell the truth? And when can you afford to tell the truth? And can you really afford to not live out by your values? And what comes up in the conversation often are a lot of constraints, real constraints. I'll lose this opportunity or what have you. Do you do that cost-benefit analysis? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's cost me a ton of money. to be what I think of as ethical and to live my values. Look, let's be, nobody, is anybody tweeting? Are we like expanding? Okay, nobody tweet this. Okay? When I got kicked out of Citi, the person before me also got fired or reorged out or whatever you want to say it was. They vested all of his stock, and he left, and they gave him a bonus for the year, and he left with, like, I can't remember, it was 42 or 44 million bucks. I go up against the CEO because I think we need to reimburse these clients for what we did wrong. I won. He let me go. Anybody want to guess what I got? Because the answer is zero. The answer is zero. And of course, they also got me because we were in the financial crisis. So, and if you go up against somebody and try to sue the company, you're never going to work again, and my reputation. But some days I'd like my $42 million, please, right? So that was a very tangible cost. Back up. I remember, when I was closer in age to all of you who are at school, and, had just started as a research analyst, and was about to publish my very first piece of research, which was negative, and it was a company called American General. And everybody had positive outlooks because it was the 90s and that's what you did. You did. Like you'd be a persona non grata, and I didn't quite know that yet. But my piece of research was they're growing their loan book. Everybody thinks it's going to the sky. I've done this really interesting, cool analysis that shows that the growth is simply by moving into what we now call subprime. And the growth is masking a significant deterioration in loan quality. And this is going to come and bite him in the ass. And I remember starting to put this piece of research. The head of IR there happened to be from my hometown of Charleston and said, do not publish this. Do not publish this. He said, let me give you some good advice. That research was a little hotter then, cooler, sexier than it is today. But he said, research is a business. Wall Street is a business. Financial services is a business in which you can make millions of dollars a year by staying in the pack. Do not put your head up, and you can be a multimillionaire. A lot of people, including some in this room, are like, that sounds awesome. I would like to keep my head in the pack. And for me, because I'm such a prickly, natural contrarian, ask my parents, I'm like, absolutely not. I'm going to have my ethics, and I'm going to da-da-da. So I published that piece of research. I was not only right, I was extremely right extremely quickly when everybody else was wrong. So for me, if I'd stayed in the pack, I would have done this. For me, because I stepped out of the pack, had my ethics, my career soared. I think I was the #1 ranked analyst more quickly than anybody had ever made it to #1. It was that kind of success, and it paid off. So that's it, folks. On the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand. But I definitely did make a decision in my career that if I was going to be the only woman in the room and I was going to stand out, that I was going to stand out. You might as well just lean right into that characteristic because I wasn't going to change it. And it got me to the top, and it got me fired twice. So pick your poison. Pick your poison.
I think we're going to begin with the Q&A. So if you have a question, sort of flag me. Oh, we have one here in the back.
Yes. Hi.
Hey.
All right. Ms. Krawcheck, I want to talk about your power as a communicator and your journey as a communicator. Were there thoughtful choices that you made being in a male-dominated environment? Did you decide to communicate like a male or lean into your power as a woman?
Great question. So I found two things. I found working on Wall Street, where is the power? It's in the numbers. And so therefore, the power is not, at the time it wasn't marketing, it wasn't HR, it wasn't audit, it was in the numbers, it was in the P&L. And so I went running to the fire and became CFO of Citigroup, which at the time, it hadn't happened for a woman before. And my analyst training helped with that. So if I had the numbers and owned the numbers and knew the numbers and recalled the numbers, you couldn't ignore me. You could not ignore me. So that was number one. Where is the power? Run toward it and then completely own it. And the second thing I did was developed a sense of humor, meaning telling jokes, not like, giggling at other people's. And the reason that I did that is because it's disarming. And that when I was in the room full of men, if we're laughing together, the sexism doesn't completely fall away, but falls away. For example, when I was brought in to run Merrill, I went to one of the offices, actually around here in this neighborhood. And I'm standing, I've been brought in, I'm at Smith Barney. The advisors are all older than me, all my dad's age. And Merrill thinks it's the best. And so I'm coming from Smith Barney to turn around Merrill. Well, I walk into that room, and I remember the oldest guy in the room, who's clearly the top dog, is sort of sitting there with his legs splayed open. Come on, guy. Arms back, sitting back, tilting back. I mean, please, right? But doing that whole alpha dog thing, and then it's like, what makes you think you have the skills and the experience to run Merrill Lynch? I'm like, fuck you. Oh, sorry. This is not going to sound funny, and it wasn't particular, but I took the temperature down by pretending I was in an interview, and sort of going through my resume. I mean, that, to me, was the only choice. Because the other choice would have been, you're an asshole, and, to go against him, which would have turned the entire room against me, right? The other thing would have been to sort of fluster through some kind of explanation of why I thought I was capable, which would have sort of taken me down. So the only way I saw through it was sort of a humorous, you're interviewing me and how am I doing? And by the end of it, I'd won them over. So I think those are the two things. Know your stuff, be where the power is, and then, use humor to deflect stress.
We have another question here.
I'm going to ask two questions. First one, you talk about identifying your personal brand, and it's about what do people talk about you when you leave the room.
Mm-hmm.
How do you find that? Because you're out of the room. And the second question is, you talked about the third time you were taken to the glass cliff. You made the decision, I see what they're doing to me, and I'm not going to let it do. For you to make a huge decision at that point in time in your career, was that decision based on your skill set or your financial standing?
Yeah. So on the second one, it's a great question. I absolutely was able to have the freedom and flexibility, to start a company because I built, I didn't get my $44 million, but I built wealth, and my husband and I had wealth. And so I knew that if I did it, and it didn't work, that we were not going hungry, we weren't gonna have to pull my kids out of school, et cetera. Which is sort of why I do think the best time to start companies can be when you're young or when you're not so young. It's really tough, to be fair, if you are 35, and you've got the one kid and the other kid on the way, and the parents now need you, and you're in that sort of squeezed spot. I gotta tell you, there's something great. You don't wanna wish your life away, but there's something great as a woman. I've got 2 kids. When they go away to college, and you're in your young 50s, and the men are all like, oh my God, I'm so tired from my career, and I wanna play golf, and I'm exhausted, and blah, blah. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I've been fighting with 2 arms tied behind my back for years. This is liberating and freeing, and like, I'm gonna go. And so I'm seeing more of that, of women in their 50s who are just like, I can flex. So very good question. And then the second thing about what is your personal brand? I mean, you gotta start with what you're good at and what you love. And by the way, very few people get away with, my personal brand is I'm so well-rounded at everything. Who cares? Like, what is the thing? What is the thing? And so are you, the sticky problem solver? Are you the, the quant who can go from numbers to words? Are you the one who is the storyteller? Are you, and you shifted. But if you don't know, ask. Go to your friends, people who you work with, people who you go to school with, and say, what do you think my personal brand is? And what should it be? You know, and again, you know, it's hard, frankly, it's hard to have a great personal brand if you're not very good at your job. So you just want to start with that, right? And find those things that you're good at. Everybody in this room is excellent at something. But find that thing and absolutely own it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, I'm Sivan. First of all, thank you for a super engaging and authentic conversation. It's been a pleasure. As someone who grew up with poor parents, poor dad, and a very strong woman, I'm a feminist, and I learned on my own, you know, I learned how to badly invest money, and then I learned how to basically go from minus to a lot. So I love the mission of Ellevest. I'm curious, what did you learn in your journey in Ellevest? How is the experience designed differently on that platform that actually enables women to invest and make more money?
Yeah. Great question. There are the biggies, you know, which is the investing algorithm that takes gender into account. And I remember one of the digital offerings did we're gender blind. And I'm like, that doesn't work, you know, for women, because again, we live longer and earn less. So the biggie for me was, let's get that algorithm right so women don't run out of money. What was fascinating is we found 1,000 other little differences. So an example, what we found is that if you ask an investor their risk tolerance, a man will go through this and he will say, that seems like a really important question, but I don't know the answer. Because, by the way, nobody does. Nobody knows their investing risk tolerance till, you know, you go through the subprime crisis, but okay. But a gentleman will say, that seems important, I don't know, I'm going to take an educated guess and continue on. A woman will say, that seems important, I don't know, I'm going to leave. I'm going to find a book on investing risk tolerance. I'm going to read the entire book. I'm going to quiz myself on the book. I'm going to find another book, right? I'm a blah, 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 blah. And then I will come back and invest. And guess what happens? She never comes back. Why? Because what's more interesting than figuring out your risk tolerance? Everything. Right? Same thing with jargon. So, you know, women, you know, try to onboard and they don't understand the jargon and they need more financial education. Everybody needs more financial education, but we found was the same gender difference. That he sees jargon, he doesn't understand it, he contextualizes it, he goes through. So when I was running Smith Barney, our biggest product was a managed account. No gender knew what it was. The men would not ask because they don't ask for directions. The women wouldn't ask because we don't want to bother. He would buy it, she wouldn't, right? So we stripped the jargon out. We also took the entire experience, which at the time for most folks, the entire experience was, we think the economy is this, and here's an article on that, and this is whiz-bang this, and tax loss harvesting that, and blah, 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 blah. And we took it into, tell us about you. What do you want to achieve, right? And what we found is that making money is a motivator for men, some women too, but what it can be an even greater motivator for women is goals-based investing. I want to find to outperform the S&P. What I really want is to buy a house in 5 years. What I really want is to start a business in 2 years. What I really want is to get a friggin' divorce, right? What I really want is to figure out. And so we put together an investing platform that's goals-based as well as financial guidance that's goals-based. We came out just last month with the only divorce financial planning package in the industry for women. Like, when couples get divorced, men's net worth goes up, women's goes down. Lawyers don't help with this, right? So goals-based, meeting real needs, are those differences that we have. And the other thing we do is we find agender differences. Men, impact investing, maybe, I don't know. And there's, of course, a whole war against it going on now. You saw New Hampshire wanted to criminalize it, for God's sake. Women are like, I do not want to give up a financial return, and I also want to get a positive impact. That's what I want, and I don't want to hear it. And so providing those impact investing opportunities for her, in fact, we just announced yesterday that for our private wealth clients, we gave them the opportunity to invest in the Michelle Wee documentary. So interesting, eclectic things like that where the returns are available. So y'all should all be clients of Ellevest, I'm just saying. For sure, right? Right? We have to support each other.
Absolutely.
And I have to build your wealth, so there we have it.
Thank you so much. As somebody who was at Citi when you were there during all of that crazy, this was actually a real treat for me. So thank you for being so transparent and being a legend, like I said earlier, to all of us on Wall Street. Couple of gems that I took away from this talk today. Number one, stay curious and stay learning, right? That's why we're all here. Don't stop learning. Number two, for those of us who are in business and finance, know your numbers, know your numbers, know your numbers, and be able to articulate the story behind those numbers, right? Number three, integrity can be costly, but you can sleep at night and you keep your reputation intact. All right, thank you so much. Fantastic, fantastic talk. We'll take a very short break and be right back with the next panel.